Cultivating cannabis under the sun has been my preference during the last 10 years. My first years cultivating cannabis. It was my preference because I absolutely believe that sun-grown cannabis has wider terpene and cannabinoid profiles, thus making it excellent medicine. That said, I also know sun-grown is leafier, and living where I live on Vashon Island in the Pacific Northwest, plants rarely finish outside. So outdoor plants may be superior in many ways philosophically, but in reality, where I live, anything that takes more than 50 days to bloom doesn't have a chance to finish. For those of you who follow Shaping Fire, you know that this is one of the reasons I've become such a proponent and supporter of autoflowers. I like that I can harvest them fully flowered in warm, dry, and sunny September. So about a year ago, I decided I wanted to try my hand at growing indoors. It was a struggle for me to decide because I identify as a regeneratively minded cannabis cultivator and struggled with the idea of using electricity to power my lights. In the end, I decided to buy an exceptionally environmentally friendly BIOS LED light and went forward growing a 4x4 tent inside in hopes of growing my own cannabis medicine with fully finished flowers. And the little tent grow would also act as a good demonstration to teach from on Instagram so I could help other patients. I reached out to soil biologist Leighton Morrison and asked him to guide me in setting up a horizon-style substrate as he outlined in Shaping Fire episode 54 on geology and biomimicry. He said sure, and off I went to try and build an indoor raised bed using all of the regenerative and living soil techniques I use every summer outdoors. These are the voyages of the Shaping Fire Living Soil Tent. Its mission to explore strange soil biology, to seek out best practices and fire flower, to boldly go where nature guides us. If you want to learn about cannabis health, business, and technique efficiently and with good cheer, I encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter. We'll send you new podcast episodes as they come out, delivered right to your inbox, along with commentary on a couple of the most important news items from the week and videos too. Don't rely on social media to let you know when a new episode is published. Sign up for the updates to make sure you don't miss an episode. Also, we're giving away very cool prizes to folks who are signed up to receive the newsletter. There's nothing else you need to do to win except receive that newsletter. So go to shapingfire.com to sign up for the newsletter and be entered into this month's and all future newsletter prize drawings. You are listening to Shaping Fire, and I'm your host, Shango Los. Today, my returning guest is Leighton Morrison. Leighton is a lifelong enthusiast of both aquaponics and living soil. His obsession with Biosphere 2 led him to set up an aquaculture at the Rodale Institute. Leighton worked with world-renowned biologist Dr. Elaine Ingham, blending his aquaculture byproducts with compost and worm castings to prove that natural inputs could replace synthetics in commercial cultivation. Leighton consults widely for agriculture, soil regeneration, and commercial land management projects throughout the United States. Leighton is currently founder of Kingdom Aquaponics and invented their line of living compost and compost tea living soil products. Leighton is a sought-after speaker and co-host of a weekly podcast on the Future Cannabis Project YouTube channel. One note, both Leighton and I lost loved ones this week, and this episode is a bit less jolly than most of the times that we're together. If we sound a bit off, that's why. We're sad. During today's episode, we will describe in detail the first cycle of the Shaping Fire Horizon-style indoor raised bed. During the first set, we will review how I set up the substrate horizons. During the second set, we will discuss our soil tests, the arrival of the first pests, and any risk of a perched water table. And then during the third set, we'll talk about ground covers, scrogging, and growing mushrooms in the substrate below the cannabis plants. Welcome back to Shaping Fire, Leighton.
Thanks, Shango. It's always a pleasure to come back and chop it up with you. Right on.
And, this is kind of a different show, right? Because, often when I have you on the show to talk about something within your expertise, I'm essentially trying to draw out, this academic and practiced information out of you. But today you're here because you taught me, this biomimicry style, or what people are calling horizon style growing technique. And I figured if I was going to do a show where I kind of did a debrief of how my first cycle went, then I might as well have you here. So thank you for both teaching me the style and then coming back to help me tell everybody what I did wrong.
Well, thank you for being a sacrificial lamb today.
Right on. All right. So, I want to remind everybody before we get going that the application of your strategy can look a lot of different ways, right? Like you can plug in different soil recipes into this model and it'll still work great. So don't get hung up on my own choices of specific inputs. Like, for example, like you can get nitrogen a lot of different ways. I personally have had excellent success over the years with dehydrated pig's blood. That may not be your preference though. So don't get hung up. It doesn't matter like what your inputs are to learn the substrate style. It's all about the division and the percentages of clay, silt, sand, organic matter, and that's the cornerstone of this approach. So like during this first set, you're going to hear what I use, but it may not be what you use. So don't get too hung up on that. So let's start out by talking about how your biomimicry horizon style played out in real terms for my bed. So I use a grassroots fabric pots 4x4 raised bed in a 4x4 tent in the Shaping Fire offices. So what that gives me is an 18-inch soil depth with about 2 or 3 inches of hardwood matter on top, and we'll talk about that hardwood matter later. So if you are working in a container that's deeper than 18 inches, your numbers are going to be a little bit different than mine, which is why we're going to be giving you percentages of these different areas. So when we go through this, remember these numbers are based on my 18-inch soil depth from a grassroots fabric pots 4x4. All right. So with that said, there are 3 layers in a horizon style bed. The top layer is the O horizon. Next down is the A horizon, and then under that is the E horizon. So if you take that 18 inches, in Leighton's style, and by the point, Leighton, at any point, if I'm saying this wrong, feel free to correct me.
Well, you did say percentage, and you really shouldn't. You should say fraction. So basically, the horizontal soil system is based on a 7-part system. So your E horizon is 1/7, your A horizon is 2/7, and your O horizon is 4/7. So that's the easy way to break it up. So whatever your depth is, divide it by 7, and then use that as a method to building the proper depths.
Fabulous. So I took that math and Leighton and I applied it to the 18 inches. And so that ends up with an O horizon, your top layer. Your O horizon for my bed is 10 inches. And so that's all going to be organic matter. And so, for me, I chose to use no-till soil that from pots that I've been using the last few years, and so it's in quarters. It's a quarter old soil, it's a quarter fish compost, a quarter pit moss, and a quarter Alliance soil inoculant, which actually is a product that Leighton makes, which is essentially an incredibly living soil. Would that be a fair thing to call it?
Well, it's really just kind of organic matter that has been infused with fish biology and soil terrestrial biology. It's just basically I make this very biologically rich compost. I strip it mechanically and add fish brew, bold flow, to it as I'm stripping it. So once it comes out of the stripping process, then I screen it out to different coarseness. And so the Alliance is a very coarse product. So it's kind of like you'd fibrous compost, but it's incredibly biologically active.
So, if you want to get that from Leighton, you can, and it will certainly help get your bed going. But theoretically, if you didn't want to get something like that, you could double up on your, your no-till soil you're bringing in from your outdoor pots, and then go with, half soil, a quarter fish compost, and a quarter pit moss. In my case, because I'm not a big fan of using peat moss, because I don't see it as being a renewable resource, and they destroy pit bogs to get it. or peat bogs rather to get it. So I'm very happy with the pit moss, which is made out of organic paper, and I find that works really well. So in my case, I've got a quarter my regen soil, a quarter fish compost, a quarter pit moss, and a quarter of this super infused stuff from Leighton.
Now, let me ask you this. Did you get the grower's grade, or did you get the Cocoa Complete?
Of the pit moss?
Yeah.
I just got this.
Because they have a few different products.
Yeah, I just got this. I forget actually the name of it.
It's probably grower's grade.
But it's the stripped down stuff. I got the stuff without any added nutrition.
Okay.
And so I wanted to control that.
Perfect.
Great. So those are the major components, and within that, I also put my amendments. Right. The amendments, like the physical amount of them, is so small that it really doesn't play a role in the overall recipe as far as like how the soil is built. Adding the nutrition, you could probably hold it in 4 hands, right? So, but for me, I chose crushed oyster shells, ollie fish compost, dehydrated organic pig's blood, of course, Dynamyco fungal inoculant, pit moss, and then that supercharged soil inoculant from Leighton. So you take that and you mix that all up, and that becomes what we're calling here your organic matter. So Leighton, do you like how I described that?
Yeah, no, I think you described it perfectly. It's basically you're building a soilless medium or a super soil. Because you're adding the amendments, we would tend to call that a super soil over a soilless medium. But that's the bottom line is you're still using a traditional style of growing cannabis, but you've also got those added benefits of the E horizon and the A horizon to help mitigate moisture as well as provide sand, silt, and clay for the organic or for the biology to mine and provide nutrient.
Did you intend to call this a soilless medium? I mean, it's half soil.
Well, no, the O horizon is a traditional soilless medium.
But isn't half of that like soil? Like a quarter of it is my no-till soil from my pots, and then another quarter of it is the compost that you make. Doesn't that count as soil? I mean, I always thought that soil-less is like coir and peat and perlite and all that stuff that actually isn't soil.
Correct, and I may have misspoke because I don't really know what your no-till soil pot was. Like, was it peat? Was it?
No, it's none of that. It was just like literally old soil that I got originally out of bags. That was just like potting soil.
All right, then it is soil.
But then I used it for 5 years, right? So it was like bad soil gone good.
So it was broken down.
Yeah, totally.
So then, yes, I would refer this to more as a soil than a soilless medium. Right. Although you do have soilless medium components in it.
The pit moss, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And compost, because compost is not soil. Eventually it'll break down to soil, but in the beginning parts of the composting process, it's more of a nutrient-rich material than it is per se a soil. But we can, we don't need to get too crazy on the finites.
All right. So that's your top 10 inches in when you're talking about an 18-inch bed. So then your next layer down is what's called your A horizon. And when using Leighton's 7ths model, if you have an 18-inch bed, this next layer, this A horizon, is 5 inches. And the A horizon is made up of 17% clay, 13% silt, 50% sand, and then the last 20% is another portion of the organic matter mix that you made for the O horizon. So when you're making the organic matter for your O horizon, you're going to want to make, enough to fill up the O horizon plus some extra to go in the A horizon. And then at the end, also, I threw in a splash of biochar. I mean, biochar is so potent. I just took a couple handfuls and threw it in there, so it was there. But it's such a small component of it. One of the crazy things about this is, since I was trying to make this bed as regenerative as possible, with the obvious exception of the fact that it was indoors and I was using electricity, I decided that I wanted to wildcraft all this stuff. And wow, depending on where you live, your mileage may vary trying to do that. The clay was easy, right? As many of you know, I live on an island, and then along the outskirts of our island, along the beaches, we have got all sorts of soil erosion that is going into, the salt water. And so getting clay for me was really easy. I just went down, and there were big hunks of beautiful clay that were just falling off the clay wall, where you could see all the layers of earth exposed from, the ocean water, eroding it. So that was great. Grabbing the clay was easy, heavy as hell, but easy to get. And then, the sand was certainly easy as well, since I live on an island. I could just collect some sand. And when you're only doing a 4x4 bed, you're hardly taking any, it's like a 5-gallon bucket, The hard part for me was this damn silt. I understood from Leighton that I wanted to look for silt along running fresh water that was heading towards the salt water around the island. And so I looked at, first I went to an estuary on the island where the fresh water meets the salt water. And I grabbed a bunch of that, and I took it home, and I gave it a shake test in a mason jar. And the component of silt was very low. Leighton, why don't you explain how to do a mason jar shake test for people who have never done that?
Sure. It's a home or an at-home textural test. So basically, you fill a mason jar 3/4 full of soil, then you add water till the water's just above the top of the soil that you added, while still leaving an airspace. Then you seal the lid, shake it up, set it down, and over the course of 2 days, what'll happen is everything will settle and the water will go clear. And that's the key. You want that water to be clear. And then you will see the layers. The first layer, the sand, will settle out the fastest. Second, the silt will settle out. And lastly, the clay will settle out. And usually you'll get some organic matter floating on the surface of the water or floating just on top of the clay layer. So you basically get sand, silt, clay, and organic matter ratios or percentages by doing this.
And so I did this, and every time I took a sample, it was like almost all clay. There was hardly any silt. And so after I did that and was not getting a high enough silt percentage where the fresh water was meeting the salt water at the estuary, I decided to work my way backwards up that stream, further up. So I'm like, okay, maybe instead of doing estuary, maybe I should take it from along the stream, right? Maybe there'll be more silt there. And so I took another sample there, brought it home, shook it up, let it sit for 2 days, looked at it, and there was more silt, but still not enough where I thought that I was going to be able to divide it off to be able to get 13% silt in my A horizon. So I'm like, damn, I still need more. So then I worked my way up even further. I was planning on going up as far as a freshwater pond that was up this stream, but what I found was an elbow in the stream, where it was not going straight downhill. It came down and it kind of jagged right, and then it continued down. And in that elbow, I found silt. So for whatever biomechanics reason, that elbow held the silt better than the other two places. And when I took it, it still wasn't like 80% silt like I was hoping, but it was like 50% silt. And that was like way, way better than anything else I had gotten. So I'm like, fine, we're just going to call this good. And because it's always good to remember that this, while we have goals, we have benchmarks for what we're trying to hit. If you can't hit the benchmarks with what you have available locally, just frickin' go for it. And so I did, and so that's where I harvested. Just a little bit of silt, because again, this is only a 4x4 bed, and I grabbed it and then added that as my 13% silt. So I guess technically in my math, since I was using material that was only 50% silt as my 13% silt, I probably only have 7% silt in my bed. And, for better or for worse. I wasn't sure how to make up for that silt. And I don't think I did this right, but I actually tried to make up for some of the silt by adding some volcanic Akadama clay from Japan that I had. And I'm not recommending you do that, right? Because bringing clay from Japan for this is like so environmentally a bad idea. But I happen to already have the stuff from when I was doing aquariums back in the day. And I'm like, hey, this is a good use for it. So I put that in there. So before we go on, is there any way that makes sense, Leighton, using Akadama volcanic clay as a replacement for silt, or is that just like totally wrong?
No, there's a technical challenge to making a definitive difference between silt and clay. I try to stick along the lines of that silt is organic matter broken down about as far as it can without specialty bacteria to break it down further. Clay is more like ground up rock or ash from a volcano. So bottom line is, though, they're the very, very fine, small particles that have been pretty much broken down as much as they can through natural processes, other than these really finite special bacteria that can continue to break them down further and make them, again, plant available so that the plant can uptake those minerals. And then when the plant dies, guess what? It goes back to silt. So it gets really complicated at that microscopic level of what is a clay platelet, what is a silt particle. Traditional soil science has always measured these by particle size, and I think that's again kind of archaic in this day and age, where we know that the clay platelets are both positive and negatively charged. So that the top of the clay platelet is positively charged, and the outer rim, think of it as a flying saucer, the outer rim is negatively charged. So the negatively charged rim pulls positively charged cations and stores them. So these are nutrients around the outside perimeter. So silt doesn't do that. Silt is generally negatively charged, does not have a positive aspect of it. So, and sand has no charge. So how do we define these as through particle size and not through characteristics of perhaps both weight and also the ability to hold certain nutrients? So I think that soil science has got to kind of come up to speed with what we know as far as some of these more advanced understandings of these materials.
So it sounds to me that even though I used that volcanic Akadama clay, like that's cute and that filled up the place, but it really wasn't a silt replacement. It was just something else that probably helped the bed.
And let me ask you a question. When you did your silt test, what was the other component? Was it clay or was it sand?
It was sand.
Okay, so here again, you can use that combination to understanding that, okay, of this material I collected in the stream, 50% of it was sand, 50% of it was silt. So now I just use more of that and don't add any sand. You see where I'm going with this?
I do.
So that's, again, you have to do a little bit of math and apply some common sense, but you can get pretty close to these ratios, especially if you're using this textual at-home test method to determine exactly what your inputs are. And then just kind of play with them a little bit. And again, I use the ratio 17 clay, 13 silt based on their properties. So if you're off on your ratios, it's not the end of the world. But again, your goal is to try to get as close as you can to that for biological processes, so that you're allowing the specific biology that breaks clay down that doesn't break silt down, and vice versa. So you're just providing all of these inputs for really getting that advanced level of living biology to have all of the potential tools and methods to function at high level. And again, we haven't even started talking about fungi because they also are really important in breaking those things down and pulling out nutrients, as well as providing biofilm to actually make aggregates out of them. But we'll get into that in a little bit.
So the last thing that's in this A horizon is like that splash of biochar. I just put in 3 handfuls. And is there a reason why the biochar goes in the A horizon instead of in the top of the O horizon?
You can go in either place. Generally, I would probably be more thrilled to throw it into the O horizon, so that it's really going to be like a little condominium for biology to set up shop in. But in the A horizon, it's fine. I mean, the roots are going to get down into the A anyway. So it's either way. And I encourage people too to get real creative with their O horizon. There's no reason why you can't put some, old hay or some leaves that you've collected or some forest stuff in there. It's, again, diversity. I'm all about that. And all that forest stuff is going to be biologically active with local microbes too. So, absolutely. That's always an
extra win. Okay, so far we've got the first top 10 inches is the O horizon of organic matter, and then next down is the A horizon, that is 5 inches, which is the clay, silt, sand, and a little bit more organic matter. And then on the bottom of the bed, the last 3 inches is the E horizon, which is sand and rocks. And you could use bagged sand if you live in an urban environment or something. I'm lucky that I just happen to live on an island, and so sand is everywhere. And I loved the idea that it came already living with water-based IMOs that also were oxygen tolerant, since the water, the tide goes up and down, right? So I grabbed a bit of sand from the beach, and then So Leighton, why don't you explain why you recommend the rocks should be multicolored?
Well, every color indicates a level of mineral. So the different colors represent different parts of the periodic table. So the more colors you get, the more variety of those minerals are available for the mycorrhizae to mine. And something else that you said about bag sand, just be careful not to get play sand. You don't want the white fluffy stuff. You want coarse, it should be taupe color or yellowish or brownish. That's the type of sand you want, not the white powdery stuff. That's important.
Right on. Yeah, that white powdery stuff, that's more like over-processed, like white flour,
Right.
Yeah, you want chewy stuff.
And I encourage everybody to take a 5-gallon bucket and fill it half full of sand, and then take measurable gallons of water and dump it into that bucket until you see the water just going over the top of the sand. And then look at how many jugs you used. You will be blown away at how much water coarse sand can actually hold.
Right on. So Leighton explaining to me why having multicolored rocks started me on a very difficult process, because I was down on the beach and I was token and I was looking at all the colors of all the different rocks on the beach. And I'm like, I can collect these rocks and I'll have 15 different colors. This is going to be the best bed ever. And so I started collecting these rocks, and then Leighton had told me that if you can break the rocks open, like crack the rocks, because if you're wild crafting rocks, they have gotten smooth on the outside and they don't leach their minerals very, very conveniently. And so he's all like, if you can hit it with a hammer and break it open, you'll have the raw interior so that the minerals can be extracted. Well, I was all excited about that. So I started collecting rocks, and then I put them in a burlap bag, and then I took my sledgehammer to it to break them open. And then, that was great. So I poured those into a 5-gallon bucket. And then I grabbed another bag, a burlap bag full, and I hit that with a sledgehammer. And I did that for like an hour, got totally exhausted, all sore. And I'm like, all right, I got my damn rocks. And I bring them in the house and I put them in the bed. And they were like this little dribbling in the corner of this big ass bed. And I'm like, oh shit, I have to do 3 inches of the whole bed of this. And I'm like, no. I'm like, I do not have the strength and the time and the life and the muscles for this. And so what I decided to do is I did that process like 4 more times, so that, let's say, like maybe an inch of the 3 inches was hand wild crafted and hand broken up rocks. And then I went to the landscaping store and I bought, like, I honestly don't know what the rock is anymore. I forget, but it was just their like straight up gray drainage rock that they use for landscaping. And I just poured bags of that in there. So, I say this, so you can laugh at me, but also to realize that, we can only do what we can do. And when I realized how much physical labor that was going to be, I just decided that, having some natural rocks from the wild environment, that's great. But you know what? I'm going to have to finish the fill with what I can just go buy and dump. And that's what I did. And I got great results, but, I just figured it was worthwhile, because if you are going to try to wildcraft your inputs, you're bound to run into something that's hard to find where you live, and just don't stress about it, right? Just grab some stuff and move on.
Agreed. There's no such thing as perfection in nature. So don't try to be perfect.
So it's really exciting when you get to this next part and you get to put everything in the bed, right? At this point in the process, it was kind of like, if you're having, a chef night and you're making something special at home, you can use the French strategy of mise en place, right? Where you get all your ingredients, you cut everything up and you put them in like little ramekins there on your counter. And then once all your ingredients are set, then you go and you make your meal. This is kind of mise en place, but for like soil science. I went ahead and I collected everything. I got everything ready. And then the day came that I made the bed. Now, I want to put in here something that I did not realize I should have had until afterwards. So I don't have this in my bed, but after I made the bed, Leighton's all like, oh, you should put a 4-inch PVC tube along one of the corners so you can see how much water's in the bottom. And I'm like, what? I'm not digging that corner back out. No. And so, but if I were to do this again, I would do this. So Leighton, would you explain in retrospect why, you recommended that I did that?
Because you couldn't get your hand down between the liner and the tent. So there's no way for you to see other than if you overflow, because you did put a liner underneath there, correct? A rubber liner?
Yeah.
So the rubber liner serves as a way to prevent any excess moisture from leaking out around the bottom of your tent. Unfortunately, with the grassroot pots, they fit perfectly in a 4x4 tent with no room for you to get your hand between the liner, the pot itself, and the tent. So that's where I would suggest it to you to set that piece of pipe, because, and it doesn't even have to be 4-inch. It can be 1-inch, and you basically take 2 styrofoam balls and a dowel, and you drop that styrofoam. Well, you take a styrofoam ball, put the dowel into it so that the ball stays on it, and then take the other one and slide it down till it's about 8 or 10 inches above the bottom one, and then you just drop that whole thing right into the tube. And then as you water, that little dowel is going to come up, and you're going to be able to determine exactly how much water is being stored in your E-horizon, and never flood it, because you actually know, oh shit, I've added 20 gallons to this thing. It's not leaking out. Where's my level? And you'll say, oh wow, my level's at 2.5 inches. So it gives you a way to monitor just how much water is actually being stored in your E or your aquifer, because that's basically what you created, is an aquifer.
And I do recommend that you do that, and I'll use that next time. So I'm at the point now that the only time that I can really check how much water is in my E-horizon is when I go to take a soil test and I dig in deep. I just go dig in extra deep all the way down to my E-horizon and put my hand there and see how much water is there. And, that is not efficient at all. That's like, testing my water, checking my water table once at the beginning of a run and once at the end of a run, and twice a run. It's worked out for me so far, but I do wish that I had that vertical tube just stuck in one of the corners so I could check that out.
Yeah, it just makes it easier.
Yeah, right on. So, okay, so here we are at the end of set 1. We have gone through an explanation of the O horizon, the A horizon, the E horizon, both what I did and more how to think about it, right? Because this is kind of an algorithm, and what you choose to use will vary, and the size of your bed is going to be different. So your how much you need to make to fill up your sevenths is going to be different, but more we're just trying to make sure you understand the idea behind it so you can play out this algorithm for yourself. So, Leighton, anything else you want to add to this before we go to break?
No, I think you covered it. And again, it's all about diversity. So, colors are important, textures are important, using your local resources is very important. If you have to buy something, you have to buy something. It's not the end of the world. But again, you're looking for, if you're buying sand, you want very coarse sand, so like masonry sand. And as far as, the rocks and stuff, one piece that I do want to really kind of reiterate is that when you're putting those rocks in there, you don't have to fill all 2.5 to 3 inches in rock. It can be, 1/3 rock and the rest can be sand, but make sure you wash the sand down into the rocks. You don't want to have any voids whatsoever. If you have voids, then organic matter is going to get down in there and it's going to go anaerobic. So the E-horizon really functions as what's called sand filter. So a sand filter is generally used in, golf courses to move groundwater around. They can also be used in zoos to separate water that has a lot of duck manure in it. So it's a technique that prevents organic matter or fine particulate from getting down into that water layer. So you're basically separating fine particulate from water itself, and that's the beauty of the E, is that it acts as a sand filter.
And if you're interested in sand filters, I encourage you to go back to the Shaping Fire episode with Stephen Reisner about the water food web and how to use aquaponics with living soil systems. We talk about that a little bit there. So, Leighton, I wish you would have told me I didn't have to have 3 inches of all rocks, man. I think I missed that in my notes when we originally talked. So
no, that's all right. It's all a learning process.
It sure is. So we're going to take our first short break and be right back. You are listening to Shaping Fire, and my guest today is soil biologist Leighton Morrison. There are so many seed banks nowadays that you really have options in who to choose. Not only that, if you pick the wrong seed bank, you could be in for a really sketchy ride. And that's only one of the reasons I recommend Hembra Genetics Collection to my friends and listeners who are looking for a seed bank. That's Hembra, spelled Hembra. Hembra is not just another seed bank. Hembra is a woman-operated boutique cannabis genetics provider that only sells thoughtfully curated seeds from the top names in cannabis breeding. With over 50 breeders and over 500 strains to choose from, you will certainly find something you'll love. Hembra Genetics has something for everyone with over 350 feminized strains, 200 regular varieties, and over 100 autoflowers to choose from. Names you know you can trust like Humboldt Seed Company, Night Owl, Canorado, In-House Genetics, Fast Buds, and Gnome Automatics. We both know that there are other seed banks who will take your money but have no customer service. I invited Hembra to advertise on Shaping Fire after hearing so many good stories about them from my friends. They have A-plus customer service with lightning fast response times. In most cases, Helene and Caitlin will get your order out the same day you place it, and you'll usually receive your seeds in just a few days. Most seed banks are simply not this organized or interested in getting your seeds to you this fast. But Hembra cares. You even get free seeds with every order. Helene and Caitlin get it. They have been in the cannabis growing scene for over a decade. So save a few bucks by using this discount code too. Use the code SHAPINGFIRE, all one word, at checkout to save 10% off your order. Buy seeds from good folks who will get you great seeds reliably every time. Visit HembraGenetics.com today. That's Hembra Genetics. Cannabis folks are innovators and problem solvers, and we like to make money. Have you developed a tool, technique, or plant that you want to protect and monetize? You'll likely want legal representation that is experienced, accessible, and shares your values. Plant and Planet Law represents a wide variety of clients who choose to respect the environment while pursuing their business goals. Have you invented a machine or gizmo that you're bringing to market? Did you discover a breakthrough environmentally friendly pesticide or fertilizer formulation that you're about to start selling? Have you bred a cannabis plant with attributes not found anywhere else? Attorney Dale Hunt and his Plant and Planet team have established genetic patents in over 30 countries. Working to help entrepreneur scientists throughout the life sciences, Plant and Planet represents environmentally positive clients in cannabis and other botanicals, fungi, water purification, clean energy, emulsions, and medical applications. Plant and Planet helps people protect what they've created. If you are an early stage company with an established idea and are in the process of fundraising, often the investors require intellectual property protections happen at the same time. Plant and Planet can be your sole representation, or they can integrate with your existing legal team and plug in their specialties. Plant and Planet is made of scientists, lawyers with a real passion for cannabis, inventions, and the environment. They have the scientific and legal depth to help you establish patent protections for your great idea. You don't have to go it alone. Friendly, qualified, and honorable legal representation is available to you. Contact Plant and Planet Law today to start the conversation. Email info@plantandplanet.com. That's Plant and Planet Law. Our clients make the planet better. One of the reasons why no-till cannabis growing is so valued by farmers is because the mycelium networks in the soil remain established from year to year. And we know these fungal networks are essential because they are the nutrient superhighways that extend far and wide in the substrate to feed your plants. The trouble with growing in new living soils or blended cocoa substrates is that it takes most of the plant's life just to create these mycelium highways. Dinomyco endomycorrhizal fungi inoculant reduces that time and gets your plant eating a wider array of nutrients faster. And it's 3 times the concentration of the other popular brand in the US at 900 propagules per gram of 2 fungal species selected specifically for cannabis cultivation. Dinomyco is the result of 30 years of research and trials at the Volcani Agriculture Research Institute in Israel. It has also been vigorously trialed by cannabis and food growers across the US. Dinomyco is now available at grow shops and on Amazon in the United States. I love using Dinomyco to both speed up the growth of the mycelium networks in the soil, but also as a biostimulant to make clone cuttings more virile. You can see side-by-sides showing the comparative growth on their Instagram at Dynamyco. If you demand reliable growing results and appreciate the importance of an active root zone in creating a thriving plant, I encourage you to check out dynamyco.com and use the store locator to find out where you can get yours. That's DYNOMYCO.com. Shaping Fire listeners can get 10% off any size of Dynamyco on Amazon or dynamyco.com by using the discount code SHAPINGFIRE, one word, no caps. Whether you are starting with new beds or pots, or if you want to add some zing to tired soil, choose Dynamyco to maximize your plant's potential. Dynamyco Endomycorrhizal Inoculant. Welcome back. You are listening to Shaping Fire. I am your host, Shango Los, and my guest today is soil biologist Leighton Morrison. So in the first set, we talked about how the horizons are actually set up and how much of each. In set 2, we're going to start talking about how this soil act, some of the attributes that it showed. And right off the bat, the first attribute that it showed was fungus gnats. And so, it's funny. There's a bro science thing that, is actually, pretty good in a lot of cases, which is don't bring your soil from outdoors indoors, because when you bring in outdoor soil indoors, you are bringing in a lot of variables. You're bringing in potential pests. You're all bringing in allies, predator allies as well, but you're bringing in just like a lot of variables because you don't know what's in it. But I really wanted to use my aged no-till soil that I've been using in my pots and amending for like the last 5 or 6 years. This soil is just absolutely freaking fantastic. So I was clear that I was going to bring outdoor soil indoors. And, when I told that to a lot of my peers, they're like, oh, that's so dangerous. And yeah, that it is dangerous, but I was willing to go for it because I really wanted the living biology. So, brought in the soil, made the horizon, put it on the bed, and then turned on my super sexy BIOS lighting LEDs. And it took about 24 hours for there to just be a sea of fungus gnats. They were everywhere. And, it was a concern to see them, but I also didn't freak the hell out. I didn't have cannabis plants in there yet. I expected things to get really excited when I took them from a cold outdoor environment, because this was during the fall, so a lot of this stuff had already gone to sleep or cysted up. And when I suddenly put it in a warm, full spectrum, 18 hours of light environment, like everything hatched. All the bugs hatched their eggs, or similar. And so I had all of these fungus gnats. And so I'm like, okay, breathe and let's call Copert, right? Copert is where I get my beneficial insects from. So I called my Copert rep, and then I said, all right, I've got fungus gnats and a whole hell of a lot of them. What can you send me? And so after asking me a bunch of questions and stuff, they decided on the Stratiolalops simitis. And for those of you who actually know the correct pronunciation, you probably know that I butchered that, but you know what generally you know what I mean. And these Stratiolalops simitis, they sent me a container of that. But here's the deal. Because of how the holidays laid, by the time I asked them that that's what I needed, it was going to take them 10 days to get it to me, because they ship out once a week. And so I'm like, all right, great. Please send me that stuff. And in the meantime, I called my buddy Leighton to bitch about this and complain. And I'm like, oh, dude, I've got all of these fungus gnats. And why don't you pick up the storyline here, Leighton? What did you tell me to use?
Yeah. So it was really funny. You called me and it was like, what the hell? What am I going to do? And I'm like, hey, do you still have that Rejuvenate I sent you? And you're like, yeah, I think so. Is it any good? And I'm like, well, did it dry out? And you're like, let me go check. And he came back and said, no, it's still moist. I'm like, all right, just whip it up a tea and pour it across the surface as evenly as you possibly can. And watch.
So what is the Rejuvenate? What is the Rejuvenate?
It's just it's another one of the products that I make, and it's just basically like an instant compost tea. It's very, very fine particulate that when you add to water, just makes the water look, dirty, like chocolate. It's got a lot of turbidity in it. So it's just a simple, easy way to instantly make a very biologically diverse tea for situations like this. And then you called me back and said, what is this sorcery that you did?
It is true, because like I took the Rejuvenate, I added water, I shook it up, I evenly applied it across the soil, and not 36 hours later there wasn't a single fungus gnat, none. And I went from having like all the fungus gnats in the world to having none of the fungus gnats. And I actually did say, what is this sorcery? Because something had changed. And at first I thought that perhaps there was something caustic in it somehow to fungus gnats. And I had done something to the fungus gnats, like some kind of pesticide. But why did all the fungus gnats actually go away?
Well, you created a very aggressive environment that they became a food source very, very quickly. And in that Rejuve, you're going to have all different types of nematodes, which is probably the best way to eradicate fungus gnats, not the little predatory mites. Although they do help, the nematodes will work right in the soil and just eat the eggs as fast as they can lay them. So that's another little trick that if you can get really good biocomplete or biologically rich compost and you make a tea, you're going to create a much more balanced environment where one thing can't outrun the others. It's just too competitive.
So Leighton, I love your products, no doubt. But that being said, not everybody's is going to want to contact you and get your stuff. So I ask this question: if somebody is the secret to it to just have really well finished, biologically active compost and then make an unaerated compost tea extract? Will that work in most cases, even if it's not your product?
Oh, absolutely. And it goes back to how to make compost. And so there's a lot of recipes out there, but I like the real simple approach, which is basically collect greens and browns off your own property. I don't add manures. I don't hit temperature. If it hits 115, I flip it, because anytime you get over 120, you're losing biodiversity. If you hit 130, you are in what's called a thermophilic process. In other words, everything is getting cooked off. And when you get to that level, it's going to take a year, if not two, for all that biology to naturally come back in. So a quick way to do this is to never let it get over 115, and that's fine as long as you're just using plants. If you start playing with manures, you're going to have problems. So basically, I make vegan compost, collecting 1/3 greens, 2/3 browns, and I make the browns and greens as diverse as I possibly can. Basically, in the greens, you're looking for endophytic biology. So biology that lives inside the tissue of the plant. We know for sure that biology can come out of that plant and into your compost pile if you put enough of them in there. And again, you're looking for diversity. So I'm picking little green shoots off all the plants that I can find, and all different types, and flowers and shrubs, and you name it. And then the browns is the same. I'm looking for different types of wood chips, different types of brown leaves, different types of dead stalks of plants, and using all of that to make this stuff. And then it's just a matter of soaking it down. Like, apply as much water as you possibly can until it's just running out of the bottom of it. And then put a thermometer in it and watch. And usually within 24 hours, if you've blended the greens and browns appropriate, within 24, 48 hours, you're going to see it heat up. And if you do that, and then it goes to, say, 115 and then starts to cool off, you have it. All you got to do is take that stuff, put it in a compound 5-gallon bucket with a low-speed drill, like a plaster or paint mixer, and just throw a gallon of the compost in there, fill the rest half full of water, and then blend it, and then pour it on. You've just released all that biology. So there's a trick for you to make your own inoculant at home.
Fantastic, dude. Thank you. So in the end, the sorcery of getting rid of these fungus gnats was a well-made compost that was filled with nematodes and other microbiology. And when I put it over the top of the soil, suddenly there were all these predators of fungus gnat larvae. And so, their life cycle is very short. And so it took a very short period of time for all of those little hungry microbiologies in the compost to go and eat the next couple generations of fungus gnats. And zim zam, that's it. Sorcery. All right. Thanks for explaining that. So
yeah.
So moving on, I don't know that, a lot of times when I ask you questions, I'm setting you up stuff that I actually understand, and, I'm asking you the question, but I'm kind of asking it for the audience. This is one that I'm going to be asking for me too, because I actually don't know your answer. When we explained, this whole process, the philosophy behind it in the biomimicry Shaping Fire episode number 54, and then with all of the companion materials that I was posting to Instagram of my own bed. Some folks were commenting some concern that this was not going to work right, that this was going to end up in a perched water table, and it was interesting because, some of the angry boys were all getting themselves all bent out of shape about it, whereas other people were having adult conversations, and they were all interesting. And in the end, when I came back to you and I said, dude, people are arguing on Instagram about this perched water table. Is this going to be a problem? And you're like, no. This is a misunderstanding. And then you explained it to me, and I still do not understand it. So, I'm looking forward to hearing you explain it again. So for those people who were either concerned about it creating a perched water table, or B, people who want to give this a try and their friends may give them hassle about a perched water table, will you go through it in simple terms so that we can all understand why this does not apply to this particular horizon style growing system that you've shared with us?
Yeah, absolutely, Shango. So I think it was in the 60s. Soil engineers were trying to figure out what the best way to build a high performance sports turf for both, football, baseball, golf, you name it. And they actually created the perched water table. And what it was basically they put a liner down and put a layer of gravel. And then on top of that, compacted sand down. And then they rolled out their sod. The reason they did this was because they wanted to have a surface like a putting green that you could walk across, but you could still roll a ball perfectly without having it bounce all over the place. And also, you needed to be able to walk across this in case of a heavy rain event without it turning to muck. And so there's very, very little organic matter and hardly any silt or clay in these types of high-performance sports turf. So there's not a lot of ability to store water or to and an ability to get rid of it just as fast. So it goes back to that filling a bucket up with sand. And again, I encourage people to do that and notice how much water comes in, that it holds. And the other side of this, if you take the bucket and cut the bottom out and then put it directly on soil and then fill the bucket, half full of sand and then add water, come back a couple days later and that sand is still wet. So it shows you how much capillary action, wicking that the sand can do. So somewhere along the line, some horticulturist or plant gardener was talking about whether to put gravel or shards of clay in the bottom of their pot, and somehow confused the perched water table with what happens in soilless mediums or potting mixes in that environment. And that goes back to why I came up with the horizontal system for the cannabis industry in the first place, was because when you're using a potting mix, the bottom is going to go anaerobic and the top is going to be hydrophobic. And because it's a low tension soil, the capillary action and the ability to wick is not really there. So that's the misnomer. That's the problem, is that again, somewhere along the line, somebody said, oh, well, if I throw gravel in the bottom of my pot, that'll help me from getting this anaerobic environment, and use the word perched water table, when perched water table has nothing to do with potting soil. It's really talking about how to make a high performance sports turf. And again, so when you're comparing a pot full of potting mix to a horizontal soil system, that's like looking at a tomato versus a cantaloupe. They're not even close. So, again, do your homework. Really read up on where perched water tables come from. It was not from the horticultural industry or the gardening industry. That's just someone along the line took one term and applied it to something that's completely different.
I want to ask you about you said that in when people don't use an E-horizon at the bottom with sand and rocks, and they're using top to bottom a soil blend of some sort, that the bottom of the container is going to go anaerobic, and is the idea that the reason why it's going to go anaerobic is because you've essentially got a pot that's entirely O horizon. There isn't O, A, and E horizons. It's all just O horizon. It's all organic matter. And so when you water it, the water will go through, and certainly there will be some mobility of water, but really that water is going to collect at the bottom, just like it does in any biology with a water table. And since you've got sitting water in organic matter, it just kind of rots, which is why, since we know this is how water performs, in a horizon style living soil container, we put sand and rocks at the bottom because they can hold the water from your watering. They can hold the water without rotting. Is that the right idea?
Correct. And the A horizon will help because it's not low tension. It's actually high tension soil. It will help to pull the water out of the horizon and move it up into the O horizon as the top dries out and pulls the water up.
And so will you talk a little bit about that? Would you talk a little bit about water mobility? Hold on, before you do that. Yep. We talked about this at length in the water and watering episode we did. So if the idea of how to water your plants and how to understand how water moves around in the container, if you're like really nerding out about this, go back to the Shaping Fire episode with Leighton called Water and Watering, because we go at this for like a half hour. But for those of us who are, just interested in indoor growing and hearing this debrief on this regenerative tent, please continue, Leighton.
So water does a couple things, right? So you look at your soilless medium, your compost, your peat or pit, or whatever you're adding in there, and you're going to get what's called fines. So fines are really small particulate that when the water hits them, the water will actually move them down in the pot due to gravitational forces. So as all those fines move down to the bottom of the pot, you end up making a swamp at the bottom of your pot. So now all of that water is being held by those fines because they are high tension. Whereas the rest of the fibers are more low tension, and therefore you have more aeration. You have the ability for roots to really push through that stuff very easily, which is why that's used to grow cannabis. It was traditionally used, and still is used to grow cannabis to this day, because it has that ability for, if you feed the plant, the roots are going to go crazy. Easily expand, and obviously you're going to see the effect at the top where the plant comes out of the ground. So that being said, that's why these soilless mediums or super soils will have that issue, is that as you water, you're moving all the fines to the bottom where they're going to collect and compact and store water. Whereas with the horizontal system, your sand filter will prevent any fines from getting down there, and will, if your fines do move down from your O horizon, they're just going to naturally blend in with the A horizon, because it too is preventing that easy ability for those fines to migrate through the soil system. That's always been an issue in engineering soils, which I used to do quite a bit of, well, I still do, was preventing that fines from moving down and collecting, and then creating what would be considered, an impervious surface or layer where the water can no longer move down. It has to start moving laterally or horizontally, and that again is causing all kinds of problems. You really want everything to just move through, and again, that's why this system works so well, is because it functions both in ability to store water, prevent it from going anaerobic, while preventing the overall soil system from collapsing or causing these layers to build up.
Fantastic. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So moving right along, let's move to start talking about soil tests now, Leighton. So grab your soil test there. So I got a couple things to say before we move into this topic. So we're gonna talk about soil tests for about, the next 10 minutes or so, probably end up being 15, but this is going to be the last thing that we talk about here in set 2. So if we start talking about the soil tests and your eyes start to glaze over, and don't just leave the show, because set 3 is really great. Set 3, we're going to be talking about cover crops, how often to water scrogging and mushrooms and companion plants, right? So third set's going to be really great. But a lot of people just are not interested with the details from a soil report. So if we are about to lose you, don't go anywhere. Just skip ahead to set 3 and start listening again. Now, for those of you who are interested in the soil tests, this is what we're going to do. If you want to see the soil test that Leighton and I are talking about, you can find it on the page for this episode at shapingfire.com. That's easy. And then, you could hit pause right now and go get that and then play along with us at home. Or you can look at it afterwards. But just to be clear, we're not going to go way in depth into the soil report. This is not a show about soil reports. But Leighton is going to give his overview of it and mention what stands out for him. So we're going to kind of do this like cursory thing. The goal of this is for us to not only encourage you to get soil tests. I really like Logan Labs. They are who I have used. They are not a sponsor of the show, and I don't get any money from them. It's just who Leighton recommended back last year, and I use them and they've been great. So anyway, if you're looking for a lab, Logan Labs is great. But this is all to inform a discussion we're going to have about the beginning soil test and the ending soil test and how to compare them. All right. So with that and with the soil report in hand, Leighton, you've got it in your hand now. And so we're looking at the column that's labeled start. So what this is a test of is the test of the bed after I built it and after I had been watering it for 3 weeks, just by itself, so that the biology could start to get accustomed to this, being indoors, being in horizon level, being under lights. And so why don't you explain to us what you see in soil test 1, which is essentially the before I grew cannabis in it test?
Sure. So usually what I'll do is I'll start with pH. You're 6.4. That's, fine. That's not a big issue. Then I'll bounce up to total exchange capacity, which we would call CEC. Here you're in the high 20s or mid 20s, which is fantastic. Then we bounce down to organic matter. We have a very high organic matter content, 40.42%, which is fantastic. And then I'll start looking down at what's called your trace elements, which are very, very important. Everything seems to be pretty much in range. Your iron's a little high, no big deal. Aluminum's a little high, but again, that's not going to be a problem unless you get into a low pH situation. Look at your nitrates, 356. That means there's a tremendous amount of natural organic N available in this soil that the biology can break down and release as a plant food. So those all look pretty good. Then I'll bounce over to what's called the saturated paste test, which is probably one of the most important aspects of looking at a soil and its ability to function. So if you look down under percent, you'll see calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sodium, right? So generally speaking, that ratio should be calcium 75, magnesium 17, potassium 8, sodium 0. In this case, you have low calcium. Your magnesium is way too high, and your potassium is a little hot. But look at your sodium, 12. So you're losing a lot of potential because that sodium is stuck on that cation exchange site instead of those primary minerals. And we can talk a little bit more about where to get some of these wonderful new organic products that are basically 4% calcium. So if you have calcium and you add it, you will bump potassium and sodium off the exchange site. Calcium is what we call a double bond, so it has 2 positive charges, and potassium and sodium only have 1. Magnesium has 2 as well, so you have to be careful about CalMag.
It's so funny. I was about to say, it's so funny. You're telling me I need to bump my calcium and my magnesium. I'm like, oh Jesus, is the actual solution to this more CalMag? Because we all know. No. That is the joke, right?
Yeah, right. I know, more cowbell, right? That was. Everybody in the cannabis industry laughs about that because that was what people did, was they just pounded it with freaking CalMag. And in this case, if you put any more magnesium on here, you're going to cause way more problems. So you really just want pure calcium, and then you're going to let the plant work through the high magnesium. And by the end of the run, you'll see that magnesium came down a little bit. And your calcium actually went up in Endo 1 report. But anyway, so those are the things. And then underneath the percent, I'm again looking at trace minerals, trace elements. So trace elements are really, really important for some of the finite plant processes. So, its ability to fight disease, to accept sunlight, the ability to push nitrogen and calcium through its whole system. Molybdenum is one of those really, really important ones. So again, looking at the start, everything looked okay. I don't see, anything that really jumps out and scares me. Toward the end of the run, all of a sudden now we've lost a lot of nutrients. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as things go forward.
No, let's move right to that right now. So you're looking at the start, and so I had a pretty good start.
You had a great start.
I had a nice variety of nutrients, and I was really happy with all the natural organic matter that we had. So then I go and I do the run. Right, I grew 5 plants in that tent, which we'll talk more about in the next set. But I grew 5 plants. They vegged for like 4.5 weeks or so. I did the flip. And then I grew varieties that were ready around week 9. It took 9 weeks, and so here we were at the end. I harvest, and then I take another soil sample because I wanted to learn how much nutrition I should expect plants to use, and I was also planning on re-amending before my next cycle. So, Leighton, let's go through this again. What do you see in the soil report now after I've grown a cycle of cannabis?
So look at organic matter percent. It went down by 4 solid points, a little bit more than 4 points. Then you bounce back up to cation exchange capacity. That too dropped pretty significantly. You dropped by 5+ points. So what that indicates to me is that your organic matter was your primary source of cation exchange, or the ability to store nutrients in your soil. So in that regard, I would encourage you to top dress with a little bit more compost, so that you're putting those exchange sites back into play, because as they get broken down from compost to silt, you're losing the positive charges that would have been holding those nutrients. So that's one interesting thing.
But the drops that you're seeing, though, even though we do want to replenish, and that's the whole point of re-amending, these are drops that would be typical and expected after growing a cycle of cannabis.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly. But this is giving you exactly what you're missing if you're paying attention to it.
I like that it's also showing that the system is functioning, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's not like, I grew plants and now everything's out of whack. It's like, oh, no, this is what we would expect if you grew a proper living soil plant.
Mm-hmm. But it also gives you the direction on what you need to make sure that you're putting back into play. And again, if people get so overwhelmed at looking at these reports, and it's like, no, you don't need all of this. This would be for someone who's, very, very heavy into soil science. Really, all you're looking at is exchange capacity, organic matter, trace elements, and then your true saturated paste percentage. Like if you look at for instance, the soluble cations, right? It says calcium is up at 62, magnesium at 41, potassium at 41, sodium at 25. Then you drop down to percentage. They don't match up. They're not even close. So that's where you have to understand that soluble means that it's potentially plant available, whereas the percent actually represents what's being held on the cation exchange sites, which are think of it as a battery for your soil. So, look at your soluble cations. Calcium at start was 62, which is great. And at the end, 4.5. That means you gobbled up a tremendous amount of calcium in that run. But then you drop down to percent, you look at calcium and it's 35.64, and it actually went up to 39.96. So what that says is that as the calcium that was in the soluble cation or plant available, some of that fell down and attached to the cation exchange sites. So that's a good thing. And look at your magnesium. Your magnesium, at the end, was dropped all the way down to 25.62, which again is like the system is functioning. It's going in the right direction. It's balancing itself out. Potassium went from 12.34 all the way down to 4.24. And worse, the sodium was at 12.6, went up to 30.18. So that indicates to me that perhaps you either have high levels of salt in your water that you're using to water the plant, or you used a nutrient that had a salt base. So, we talk about mineral salts versus organic nutrients, right? There's still going to be salts in organic nutrients. The organic nutrients are harder to break down, which is why you need a tremendous amount of good biological diversity to make those available. But as the biology pulls things off, it's going to leave behind the salts. And this is where it goes back to, flushing is a good thing. Using excess water, or I used to call it, I said it originally as, just waterboard that bitch. You hated it.
Yeah, this is true.
And forced me to rename it into a rain event.
Heavy rain event.
Heavy rain event. So bottom line, in this situation, what I'd probably recommend is that you do a major rain event at the end of this cycle, so that you push those salts down into the E horizon, where they can naturally build up down there, and they won't cause a problem. So that's kind of the gist and the interesting things that have happened.
All right. So before you move on, you said a whole bunch of provocative stuff. So let's start with how much sodium there is. Now, what I would like to understand is when we look at the cation exchange section, it says that the sodium started at 181 and finished at 117. So that looks like the sodium decreased. And when we originally talked about it, you said, this shows that there were no added salts in your inputs. And I was all happy, right? Because I'm not using, salt-based bottles and stuff. And you said, yeah, you're not adding any salts. But then when we look at the soluble cations where you're having us look the percent, it went up. How come it looks like sodium went down in the cation section, but the percentage went up? They seem to be contrasting in their indications.
Well, no, actually they're not. See, soluble means that it's mobile or available, and percentage means it's bound to a cation exchange site. So it goes back to, think of that clay platelet as a little flying saucer. And around the outside of that flying saucer is 100 parking spots. That's your battery. You got 100 little pieces of these primary nutrients: calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sodium. So when the sodium started in soluble cations at 25.23 and dropped all the way to 3.91 during the cycle, well, they went somewhere, right? They went down to percentage. Those solubles, those salts that were released are now stuck on your cation, are stuck on your clay platelet, and being stored. And we don't want them stored there. We want them mobile, and we want them moving. We want to get rid of them or let them naturally break down, because there are some bacteria that can actually start breaking salt apart. So that being said, they just moved. They went from one place to another place. You follow me? I
do. So all sodium is not the same on the test.
Again, you're looking at what's being stored. The percent is what's being stored on the cation exchange site, and the soluble cations are the ones that are more mobile in the soil, so they can move. They either can get used up very quickly, or they can wash through the soil profile.
All right, fantastic. So let's move on to our third soil report that we're going to hit real fast. So this is where things get a little iffy, my dear listener. I guess I'm kind of throwing myself under the bus here. So after seeing this report, the second one, showing me how much nutrition I used, I told Leighton that I was a big fan. I continue to be a good fan of the KISS Organics nutrient pack. And Tad has put a lot of effort into making a wide-ranging blended amendment that you can just buy a bucket of and add to your soil as amendment, and it will just amend like all your different categories, and it just makes things really simple. Also, if you're an ultra nerd for this, Tad at KISS Organics, they will also custom blend you a nutrient pack as well. And he actually offered to do that for me, but I said, dude, I want to practice with what's bought right off the shelf. I don't want to get the custom stuff, but I will let people know that that's available. So that's why I'm telling you. So what I did is I followed the directions on the label, and I added my 18 cups of nutrient pack to the top, and I watered it in, and then I covered it with some some more soil from outside, and watered it in, and kind of walked away from it. I figured, okay, I'm doing fall harvest of my outdoor. I can just let this soil sit for a while, and just let it, just water it in, right? And just I don't know, let it do biology. And so I was about 3 days into that, and I called Leighton to let him know that I had done this, and he's like, "Oh, dude, you can't just let the bed sit there." And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" And he's all like, "Well, are the lights off?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, the lights are off. I want to save money." He's like, "Yeah." He's all like, the bed is alive because of the light. And if you turn off the light, and if there are no plants in the bed, you are just kind of like choking all of the biology off, and it's not going to be cycling and ready when you transplant in plants. And I'm like, whoa, mind blown. And so I realized that I needed to plant the bed so that plants would grow, so that when I was ready to replant it, and focus more on it in a few weeks after we harvested outdoor, so the bed would be ready to go. And so I'm like, oh, so I turned back on the lights, not at full power, but, enough that the bed was going to get lights. And I put in a bunch of flowers and onions and strawberries and chives and, just a whole bunch of things. And basil. I just bought that living basil from the store and threw that in there. And so, these were all temporary plants. These weren't plants that I was going to keep very long, but they were all plants that I was going to grow and then chop and then cover with more soil and then plant my cannabis in 3 weeks when I was done with harvest. So that's what I did. And it was actually really cool. And for those of you who follow on the Instagram, you got to see all the pictures of these, beautiful strawberry blonde calendula and the pink dandelions and the strawberries I was eating out of there and the onions. It was really great to be producing food for myself out of this indoor tent. So that was all really cool. However, it was time to get another soil test, right? Because I wanted to see and ensure that the amendments that I had used had brought up my numbers again, and I was ready to grow cannabis. So I took my test, I sent it into Logan Labs, I got it back, and I was disappointed because the numbers were lower than I expected. But I had done everything right. And so I went back to Leighton, and I'm all like, "Leighton, why aren't these numbers higher? I know this product works. It's raised my numbers before, but it didn't this time." And he's all like, "Well, you were growing plants in there, right?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I got great food and plant." And he's like, "Dude, they were taking up more of your nutrition. It's not like the bed's there stopping its uptake of nutrition just because you didn't have cannabis plants in there." And I went, "Oh." And so I had both amended the bed, waited a while because I was busy doing other things, and then tested it, and I had used up most, if not all, of the amendments that I had put in there 3 months earlier. And so this was a life lesson for me. And so I have to remember that all these companion plants I'm using are actively pulling on the nutrition as well. And in retrospect, that's totally obvious. So looking at my time frame, Leighton, what do you think the time frame should be between you end the cycle, I take the test, I get back my results, I add my nutrient pack. How long should I wait? How long should I be watering in those amendments and let them settle before I replant with cannabis plants? And I guess that's the question. How long should I water that stuff in before I put in the cannabis plants?
Well, again, you're continuing to grow plants throughout the cycle. So even though it's not cannabis, now it's called a resting bed, where you've got other plants in there that are keeping the living soil system alive. So you really want to, again, if you're going to plant in 3 weeks, take another soil test and now you'll know what your companions or your foods that you grew in there have taken out, or be proactive and understand that your numbers are going to continue to go down. I mean, if you look at like primaries, nitrate and aluminum in the beginning of the cycle, you were at 356 for nitrates, and ammonia was at 6.2. At the end of the cycle, you were down to 89.5 in the nitrate and 0.08 in the ammonium, and then bounce over to the one that you just took, and your nitrates are at 18.2, so they've continued to go down, and your ammonia is at 0.3. So you really need a good source of nitrogen in this thing. Bad. Like, I don't know how much pig's blood you tend to use traditionally, but I would say whatever you were using, you need to double it for now. Right. To get these numbers back up to where they need to be. So, and that's true with the molybdenum, as I pointed out before. That's down to less than 0.02, and that's a critical trace for plant function. So again, these are giving you things that you need to know as tools. How best to amend next. Again, you're going to need a good source of calcium. You could use a slow release, oyster shell flour, or you could use like a liquid calcium source like Hortical, which is an organic 4% calcium that's also acts as a nitrogen. Now this gets really complex, so I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole, but the interaction between calcium and nitrogen is a really interesting one, and not one that is often talked about. If you look back at some of Rudolf Steiner's work in the 20s, he talks about these in forms that don't really make sense. He's talking about ethereal and terrestrial planes, and it's really what he's talking about is nitrogen and calcium and the relationship they have. So those would be the starting points that I would really encourage you to focus on. I mean, soluble calcium went from 62 down to 4.5 after the end of the run. With your most recent test, your calcium went back up to 37.58. So obviously, whatever you amended had a good source of calcium. But again, you're gonna want more. I mean, in the percentages stuck on your cation exchange site. Remember that number I just gave you for calcium was soluble, so it's mobile and it's one of the nutrients that you've added. Whereas if you look down on your percentages, your cation exchange sites, you're down to 31.94. So you've lost again, your ability to store that stuff on a cation exchange site. So that's why it's really important that you get a more mobile liquid source of calcium to help to bump off the potassium, which is 27, way too high, bump the sodium off, which is 11.41. So that good calcium, liquid calcium source is really going to help you a lot in getting this bed back to a wonderful or a good place for the next run.
So I think the main lesson that I've learned from this is number one, don't do your soil test until you're ready to transplant your cannabis plants and put them in there. Because after you have done, you do your test and then you do your amendments and then you add your plants. Whereas what I did is I did my test, did my amendments, and then I waited a month with resting plants in there that was eating up nutrition and throwing me back off balance. And then I went to add my plants, and it was no longer as robust as I wanted it to be. And at that point, I needed to do another test and then re-amend. So I screwed myself with that resting period. Certainly I lost, yield per year as well. And I don't think I'll do that resting period again.
Yeah, I would say that, the interesting thing was that you saw what the goal is. You saw what you started with and you saw what you ended with. And so I agree with you. I think that starting and getting that test is critical. And then once you're ready to plant your cannabis plants, like 3 to 4 weeks before you're ready to plant your cannabis plants, then do your ending test, because you had that resting period where the onions and those other cover crops and companion plants gobbled up more nutrients. So I think that, I'm glad you did this, because you're really seeing what's happening here. And even though you amended, you still lost more nutrient. So again, lesson learned. Start, test, and just 3 weeks, 4 weeks before planting the next run, that's when you want to do your ending test, so that you can figure out what you need to put in play for the next run. And again, even if the nutrients are like organic form, again, like an oyster meal flour, or feather meal or whatever that you're putting into play, you can plant right after that. You don't have what's called a cook down phase, which is what super soils do. Is they basically blend you all these high nutrients, and then they say don't use it right away, because you're going to burn your plant if you try to plant in it. You got to let it cook off. And basically what's happening is you're going into a thermophilic process where organic and nitrogen and carbon are being eaten and broken down, and you're releasing ammonia, which is another form of nitrogen, because they've broken it apart as a gas. So you're losing nutrient value in that process. But if you don't allow the biology to break it down or bust it into more usable pieces, then it's going to kill your plant. So you have to do that. But in the case of your situation, where you're just amending with hard organic nutrients, other than the pig's blood, that's a little different. These nutrients are going to stay and play in the soil for a longer period of time. So they're not soluble, but they're not mobile either. They're bound up in their raw form,
which makes them kind of slow release.
Yes, exactly, till the biology breaks them down, and that's good, because the plant will actually say, I don't need any of that right now, so I'm not going to feed this exudate for this bacteria to break that down. But I will when I come to a point in my growth cycle where I need it. Then I'll release exudates. I'll grow out those bacterials, and I'll mine that source of nutrient.
Right on. All right. Well, thank you for going through that arduous soil report situation with me, Leighton. And so let's go ahead and take our last break. And when we come back, we're going to start talking about a little less technical stuff like cover crops and scrogging. You are listening to Shaping Fire, and my guest today is soil biologist Leighton Morrison. We'll be right back. There are a lot of good people launching new businesses in cannabis, psilocybin, and other psychedelics, and it's a very strange time for us. In the same moment that psilocybin mushrooms are illegal at the federal level, they are becoming increasingly legal in states across the country. These businesses leading the way into the future of plant medicines require specialized legal representation by attorneys who have depth not only in litigation, mergers, and acquisitions, but also in psychedelic and other plant medicines. Green Light Law Group has been empowering cannabis businesses since 2014, and as the market has diversified into psilocybin and other plant medicines, Green Light has been right there, evolving with their diverse clients to provide legal expertise with a high level of legal acumen, creative strategy, and precision that comes with an intimate and specific understanding of both business law and plant medicine. If you are a business owner trying to navigate the layered local and national drug laws on your own, you are at risk of fumbling. These confusing and quickly changing laws complicate everything. Green Light Law Group is ready to help you when hit with a lawsuit, or because you were shafted by a vendor or business partner, or simply because you want to stay legal and could use some preventative guidance before cultivating a controlled substance as an entrepreneur. Green Light Law Group is a collection of folks who care profoundly about their work, and I know this is true because I know the folks from Green Light. There is a huge difference between a big legal firm who has decided to start representing a few drug companies versus working with a collection of high integrity, passionate lawyers who are personally interested in new plant medicines and firmly believe in their power to heal. Contact Greenlight Law Group today and learn more about the services they can offer your industry-leading cannabis or psychedelics company. That's Greenlight Law Group at greenlightlawgroup.com. For years, organic cultivators have been looking for a replacement for using peat moss. Peat moss has long been the go-to soil amendment for water retention and container growing, but organic growers know that peat moss is an unsustainable resource, and the mining of peat bogs destroys habitat and releases sequestered carbon. But peat moss works so well that many have continued to use it. But now there's finally a revolutionary replacement for peat moss that shares the same benefits while also being sustainable. Pit moss sounds and acts like peat moss, but instead of being mined from fragile ecosystems, it actually is made from upcycled organic paper and tree bark. Pit moss is excellent at retaining water in your substrate and creating air pockets and tiny living environments for microbes. Pit moss instantly increases aeration, nutrient absorption, and water conservation too. Carefully and locally sourced, pit moss is the result of decades-long research into the use of recycled paper fibers. Pit moss has the fluffy nature of peat moss and handles exactly the same. And like peat moss, pit moss is inert, so it won't change your pH. Available in a range of preparations, including a nutrient-enhanced blend, a cocoa coir blend, and also as an organic soil conditioner with no added nutrients. Pit moss is also available as an animal bedding. So go to pitmoss.com now to learn more. That's PITTMOSS.com. Growing healthier, more sustainable plants. Pit moss. For 20 years, Humboldt Seed Company has been family-owned and providing reliable, high-yielding seeds originating in Northern California. While the current trend is to slap one super male into a line of hype strains, Humboldt Seed Company continues to breed with precision and care by doing large sifts and back crosses to emphasize the absolute best traits that a line has to offer. This kind of breeding takes time, talent, and space to work. No matter what kind of aroma you are particularly into, Humboldt Seed will likely have something you'll love. If you love fruit, you can choose from banana, mango, apricot, papaya, blueberry, blood orange, melon, and lemons across their various strains. They have all gas, glue, and classic sour diesel lines as well. Of course, there are the heritage California strains like OG Kush, Jack Hare, and Headband, and their award-winning blueberry muffin is one that delights just about everybody's palate, especially when concentrated. Humboldt Seed Company is proud to bring to market the infamous Freak Show Cultivar 2, which has a great THC high, but looks so much like a fern that some folks can't even identify it as cannabis. It's a plant that really needs to be seen to be believed. If you're looking for well-balanced CBD seeds, Humboldt Seed Company can turn you on to CBD strains that actually have flavor, like the dill and pepper terpenes of Willie G's Lebanese landrace. Whether you are looking for regular, feminized, or autoflowers, Humboldt Seed Company has the gear to make this your best growing cycle ever. Visit HumboldtSeedCompany.com today to check out their line of vigorous genetics, download their catalog, and find out where you can pick them up. You can also check out their Instagram at The Humboldt Seed Company to check out their gorgeous flowers and the extraordinary Freak Show plant. Humboldt Seed Company. Let them know Shango sent you. Welcome back. You are listening to Shaping Fire. I am your host, Shango Los, and my guest today is soil biologist Leighton Morrison. So, Leighton, here we are, third set, bringing it all on home. So, the first thing I want to point out is how many plants to grow in this environment. And, you know, with all of the nutrition, with us being able to add more if we want to, it's not really the amount of nutrition that is going to be limiting the number of plants we could have. What's going to end up limiting it is the space we're going to have. And so against all of the good opinion I got from all of my friends, I grew 5 plants in a 4x4 tent. And everybody's all like, what the hell are you doing? This is just going to overgrow the tent so bad. And for me, I was more interested in flavor variety than necessarily like yield, right? I wanted to grow 5 different tastes, 5 different flavors just for my own head. Cause like I'm not growing the stuff to sell. I'm just growing the stuff to smoke. And so while I understood that 5 plants was probably going to impact my yield because the plants were really competing, I didn't really care all that much. But I do agree, 5 plants is too many. It was just too many. They were growing on top of each other. And so I was growing a lot of plant matter that never finished because it had other plants growing over the top of it, especially because one of them was the Bicket OG. And the Bicket OG, the GMO cherry pie cross from Nick Risden, it is a beast. It turned my tent into a freaking cage match, and it just wanted to overgrow everything else. So I had to continually trim it down during veg, and then even after flower, it was just trying to climb over everything. So I've kind of learned my lesson, and I'm going down to 4 plants for this next round, which is still probably too many. But again, I want the flavors, and I'm going to scrog it. So if I fail again, so be it. So let's talk about cover crops. So the cover crops that I liked the most is primarily for cover crops. I use Dichondra repens, which is a very short, about 1-inch ground cover. It's a green plant, and it's commonly used in between the bricks of fancy driveways. You know, sometimes they have those ornamental, paver bricks, and so you can drive your car on your driveway, but then there's this beautiful pattern. And so they're very resilient. They hold their own water, and, they just grow thousands of these individuated plants. So that's pretty cool. And I also did ever-bearing alpine strawberries because I wanted to be able to eat from them. You did some flowers, including pink dandelions and strawberry blonde calendula. And it was just fun, right? The thing though, that I was not planning on, though, was when the scrog filled up. But before we start talking trash about how the scrog acted on the cover crops, Leighton, will you please explain the importance of companion planting from the perspective of, number 1, the various roots of the plants talking to each other, and then number 2, helping fight the surface from becoming hydrophobic?
Absolutely. The cover crops are amazing in the regard that they create a microclimate right on the surface of the soil. So the soil's not getting dried out due to the wind. It's the air moving that you're having in the tent, and it's also preventing the lights from cooking the biology on the surface of the soil. And it's literally, as the water evaporates, it's hitting the bottom of these little leaves and then dripping back down onto the soil again. So in many ways, you're allowing a natural little micro ecosystem to occur right at the surface soil. Now what's going on underneath the soil is even more important because, everything is communicating, especially if you have mycorrhizae fungi. The amount of work, there's some amazing things that we are learning at an incredibly fast pace about mycorrhizae and some of these other plant interactions and how they communicate with each other through the movement of different chemistry that's happening in the mycorrhizae. We now know that there's certain bacteria that will actually enter into the mycorrhizae and transfer to different plants, and also on the outside is a super highway of all kinds of bacteria as well as predators, like amoebas and flagellates. So again, there's this think of it as the internet, like a whole web that is being that's providing transportation of both nutrient, mineral, and biology back and forth between these plants. That interaction between roots and biology is critical for. Let me ask you this: did you have any pests, even though you had that tent packed with plants?
No, I actually didn't have any pests. Sorry. None of them during the actual growing experience, right? Like if you asked me the day that I ended, I would have said I had no pest pressure. And I attribute that in my head mostly to the fact that I worked with my consultant from Copert, Beneficial Insects, and I placed beneficial insects in the tent that were preventatives. And so I assumed that that is why I got through this run with no pests. That said, when I went through and I harvested and I went through and I trimmed, I found 2 sun leaves that were face to face with a slight slit, like normally where you'll see like spiders living, like a little hut. And I found like maybe 100 aphids in there. And I was startled. I'm like, where the hell did these aphids come from? I didn't see them anywhere else in the tent, but they had set up a home just in between these 2 leaves. And so technically there were pests there, but there was like nearly no pest pressure. Why? I do not understand.
Well, I would attribute that to a healthy biological system and healthy plants that are strong and resistant. They went.
Oh, that makes sense too, because
they all went.
The aphid, the place where they grew, it was in between 2 leaves from one of the plants that was suffering by being overgrown by the Bicket OG.
There you go. So they'll find a place that's weakest and then try to, grow out in that place, and then, get a population big enough that they can attack other healthier plants. But again, if plant health, if the plants are healthy enough, they will deter pests. And I think in many ways you had that because of the way you grew, the level of biology that you had in there, because of what happened with the fungus gnats. I mean, that was a real indicator that you put in a very diverse inoculant that's present now, and you will see it again in this next run. And let me ask you another hard question. How did your plants turn out?
Oh, they were the best plants that I've ever grown in my life, period. I mean, on one hand, because outside in the Pacific Northwest where I live, we start to get cold and rains the last week of September, first week of October. And most 8-week plants need to go at least until the middle of October here. And so we don't finish outdoor plants really, coastal Pacific Northwest. And so all of the plants need 2 more weeks when we pull them. But as my friend Johnny told me the other day, he said, "Oh, so when you grew indoor, it's the first time that you grew finished plants." And I'm like, yeah, I guess so. And so they were beautiful, colorful, dense, a complex terpene profile. There wasn't much pest pressure or like chewing of leaves, or they were like an Olympic team, and they tasted freaking incredible. So it was a wild success.
I'm happy to hear that, my friend. Yeah, I mean, again, it goes to show that if you do the right things, and you look at the bigger picture, then you're going to have a better, more rich plant, because you have had the biology and you have the diversity and you have all the components that everything needs to function properly. So, kudos to you. I'm glad you had such a great run. Can't wait to taste it.
Yeah, right on. And I of course appreciate your help on all of this. So let's talk about the cover crop and then segue into talking about scrog, because there's one thing I want to say. I talk often about I really like pink dandelions. They're an heirloom flower that just has become popular because Baker Creek Seeds is putting it out now. And if you do go and you're like, oh, pink dandelions, that sounds great, and like you go buy a pack of seeds for $3, just make sure that you don't let them go to seed when you are in flower, because it absolutely sucks to have those little white puffs of dandelion seeds floating around in the tent and getting in your sticky flowers. That is not a win. And so what I do is I just let them grow up, and they look cool during veg. And then anything that goes to seed during veg, I like grab those seeds and I harvest them and I share them with my friends. But if anything goes to seed during flower, I just go ahead and pull off the seeds before they fully form, because I'm not willing to risk that just for some for some beautiful flowers. Like I know which flowers I'm growing, So then the second thing I want to talk about is the experience that I had using the scrog. And this was actually probably the biggest challenge I had during the cycle. So I had the plants grow up. I started weaving them through the scrog. Everything's great. They start competing for space excessively. And what I found was, because the plants were so strong and because I so fully filled in the scrog, what happened was it cut off the light to the soil down below. And up until this point, I had the whole bottom filled with all these green plants, the dichondra and flowers and alpine strawberries and all this great stuff. Well, when the light got cut off from an effectively done scrog, all those plants below started to suffer. The dichondra started to pull back, the strawberries pulled back. It started not looking happy down there. And so I realized that I was starting to experience big gaps of exposed soil top. And I don't want that, because when you have bare exposed soil, you no longer have that little Amazonian buffer of weather in the inch above the soil from the dichondra repens and strawberries. And with that bare soil, you can start getting something hydrophobic, right? So I'd be watering the top, and the water just kind of like slides off the side of the bed and goes down the side, and it doesn't go into the soil. And so I'm like, shit, I don't know what I'm going to do. And so after asking around to Leighton and some of my other friends, I realized that what I wanted to do was to replace that green mulch, that green top cover crop with wood chips. And I'm like, all right, because if I used wood chips, then I could grow mushrooms. And I was very excited. I grow, a variety of mushrooms, and I'm like, oh my God, how cool would it be to be able to grow cooking mushrooms, culinary mushrooms below my cannabis in the shady area. So what I did is I didn't really have good access to wood chips, but because I live on an island with lots of artists, I was able to find really nice hardwood, like refuse from woodworkers on the island who make like bowls and utensils and things like that. Really nice organic alder and oak and madrone and other hardwoods, that maple and use those. And that worked out really well. And I was able to get those, and it was kind of fun because they're all in curlicues as well, so they look festive. And so I got a couple of huge bags of that just gifted to me from artists on the island, and I put that on top. And so essentially I just choked out the rest of the way all of the cover crops, but before I put that down, I reached out to my buddy Seth from Ready Set Shroom, and I got some golden oyster, and I got some wine cap inoculated sawdust and stuff. And he shipped those up to me, and I put those down so that when I put down these hardwoods on top of it, eventually those mushrooms occupied the hardwood, and I got some edible mushrooms. So that part of it was cool. But the part I would like you to speak to, Leighton, is that a lot of people were really concerned for me that I had put air quotes wood chips on top, because they said that the wood chips were going to steal nitrogen from the substrate. And that concerned me. And so when I told you about it, you explained to me that what they're talking about, what that biology is between wood chips, nitrogen, and the soil. But then you also explained why this wasn't going to happen with these cured hardwood bits that I was using. So will you go through that for all of us?
Oh, absolutely. So in the living plant, we talked a little bit earlier about endophytes. So there's all different types of biology. And what happens when you take fresh green trees, branches, whatever, and you chip them up, they're going to go through the thermophilic process. They're going to start breaking nitrogen down, breaking carbon down, and heating up. And that's where you have a problem, because basically those thermophytes are going to steal any form of nitrogen that they can find and essentially starve the plant out, because they're stealing it all to break down carbon. So that's where fresh, new chips are absolutely problematic. Old aged chips that are punky, no problem. Curly hardwoods, no problem. They've been cured, kiln dried, left to, or I should say, not left, but processed so that they don't warp and twist. So again, it's not even comparable to what people would think of as fresh wood chips. It's old wood. It has gone through very much a pasteurizing process, so that it's usable wood.
So this pasteurizing process, it removes much of the water from it because they're dried out and cured. And so without that water component, yes, they will break down, but they don't break down in the same way. So they're not going to be stealing nitrogen.
Perfectly said. Perfectly said.
All right, cool. Well, thanks for hitting that. So here we are. We talked about the scrog. The scrog was very effective, and when you use a scrog properly, it essentially created every nug on the plant was a cola, which I was astonished to see for the first time. And I will now scrog everything like forever. And so, I recommend that you consider scrogging if you have not. So Leighton, this brings us to the end of third set, and this is everything we wanted to talk about today. Doing kind of like this debrief from the bed. You have been assistant quarterback on this project from me. You've taught me, and you have caught me from making mistakes. I'm gonna kind of like just kind of put myself at your mercy, I guess, and just say from what you have seen, is there anything that we haven't talked about today that either somewhere between I didn't do right or I could have done better that we haven't talked about? And so don't be shy. I know I'm learning. So was there anything else that stands out for you that we should mention?
I would have loved to see you make a biological compost there, using your plant matter, your leaves, everything that you've pulled off, as well as combining it with some stuff outside. And instead of using just all hardwood shavings, I'd have loved you to mix those hardwood shavings in with that biologically rich compost that you made. That would be the only thing that I could really complain about, because I think, based on our conversations, you did all of the steps, correctly. And again, nothing's perfect in nature, so we don't have to try to be perfect. Your combinations of materials, your effort. I mean, I loved the fact that you smashed rocks. I love when you called me and said, I'm just going to get stoned and bust rocks up. And then a day later you called me back. Oh my God, you didn't warn me. Yeah. So, and I'll reiterate why you want jagged edges. The more jagged edges there are, there's more surface area for the biology to grow out its biofilm and begin to break that rock down. And when it's smooth, it's basically polished. So that's the problem, is the polish doesn't really allow them to set up in those tiny little crevices and pores and little tiny micro cracks that would have been, a jagged edge. So though that was pretty much, the only pieces of the puzzle that I think, I just want to make sure the listeners understand the reasons why that I encourage you to make your own biological compost.
So this biological compost, what's it made out of? Did you mean like, like the parts of the cannabis plants that were not the flowers. You would have liked to have seen me biologically compost the sun leaves and the stem and like all the other biological parts, like after harvest. Is that your point?
Yep.
I get it.
After harvest, every time you should be taking anything that you're not keeping and blend it with local greens and browns to the ratios we talked about, and get it as soaking wet as you possibly can. Make a nice little pile of it. Get a compost thermometer, monitor it. Once you get over the thermophilic process, in other words, once it hits a temperature and then starts going down, as soon as it goes down to 100 degrees, throw a whole bunch of seeds on it and let those seeds grow and put miles of rhizosphere throughout that compost pile. Everyone's like, oh, you're stealing nutrients. No, you're not. You're growing out biology, which is what you really want. And everything that grows there is going to die there and fall back down and make you more compost. So that is the trick to really getting a very biologically rich compost that you can use as a top dress, because you lost cation exchange sites. You lost organic matter between the start and the very end results. So you need to put that back in play. So chips are great as a way to keep that microclimate in the top of the soil, but it's also it's not going to give you the kind of nutrition and biology that a compost would have done in the same place.
Right on. Fair enough. So, Leighton, thank you so much. Like, let's see. I got a couple layers of thank you. Thank you very much for taking your time with me today and doing this debrief of what the first cycle was like and how we thought our way through it. Because really, we're not really trying to teach a specific recipe that you have to use every time. We're trying to share a perspective of how these horizons work indoors, so that we can biomimicry as much of the natural systems from the outdoors indoors. So thank you for joining me for the show today. But then also, brother, thank you for spending your time with me on this project. The hours of phone calls and me calling you because I was upset because something wasn't working right, and you essentially just making sure that I didn't run my ship into an iceberg. And so I greatly appreciate both your experience and your willingness to play with me.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Shango. It was my pleasure. And I'm glad that there's another more public example of this. I get a lot of thank yous and DMs and texts and emails about this and how it's made people's lives so much easier, because you're not fighting the plant. You're letting the plant guide you, and you're just participating in its life, which is, that's kind of the way nature works. We don't, humans have tried to fight nature since, we started expanding. But in reality, we were just stewards of the planet before we, got crazy and just started expanding or breeding rabbits. So that's kind of why I think so many people have thanked me, is because it's made their watering practices easier. They've got healthier plants. The biological diversity is much greater. So therefore, the expressions that we're all looking for, those second and tertiary metabolites, are more potent, are more expressed, and that's it. I mean, it's, again, biomimicry, copy nature, and get those good, diverse biological communities up and running for you, and let them do the work. So my pleasure, dude. Right
on. Excellent. I've got to agree with you. I get letters all the time about that episode 54 on biomimicry, and people are all like, you have totally changed how I grow. Thank you so much for, doing that episode with Leighton. So it seems to be one of the things that we talk about here on Shaping Fire that really, hit a nerve with people in both directions, right? There's a lot of people who are very excited and they're using it and it works for them. And then there's people who are all like, this is not how I learned how to do this, and I need to do some pushback. And, I appreciate that too, so long as people are being polite about it. So if you want to hear more Shaping Fire episodes with our dear friend Leighton Morrison, you can go to Shaping Fire episode 54. on geology and biomimicry, and that is the original place where we talk about this horizon system, this horizon style, and explain the philosophy behind it, the why that we use it in containers. You can also check out Shaping Fire episode 59 with Leighton Morrison, which is just simply called Water and Watering, and it explains the life of the hydro life of your container, and kind of gives you an idea of exactly how much to water. More recently, episode 82 on deploying aerobic and anaerobic soil. And that is mind-opening. And you'll learn a lot about the types of compost teas that you're going to want to use on different varieties of soil at different times of life as well. If you want to follow along Leighton, you can follow his Instagram at Kingdom Aquaponics LLC, and you can find out what he's up to and also get announcements for his incredibly popular podcast on the Future Cannabis Project YouTube channel, which is on Thursdays. But if you follow him on Instagram, you will always know who his upcoming guest is. And then finally, if you want to find out more about this regenerative tent that we grow in the Shaping Fire offices that we're using as this demo tent that we've been talking about today, you can find lots of posts about it at Shaping Fire Instagram, where we post updates and how-tos and a lot of mistakes that I made, so it's always a pretty good laugh as well. And that again is at Shaping Fire on Instagram. You can find more episodes of the Shaping Fire podcast and subscribe to the show at shapingfire.com and wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoyed the show, we'd really appreciate it if you would leave a positive review of the podcast wherever you download. Your review will help others find the show so they can enjoy it too. On the Shaping Fire website, you can also subscribe to the newsletter for insights into the latest cannabis news, exclusive videos, and giveaways. On the Shaping Fire website, you will also find transcripts of today's podcast as well. Be sure to follow on Instagram for all original content not found on the podcast. That's at Shaping Fire and at Shango Los on Instagram. Be sure to check out the Shaping Fire YouTube channel for exclusive interviews, farm tours, and cannabis lectures. Does your company want to reach our national audience of cannabis enthusiasts? Email hotspot@shapingfire.com to find out how. Thanks for listening to Shaping Fire. I've been your host, Shango Los.